A man wakes up in some sort of dreamscape without any knowledge of where or who he is. His body separates into pieces and they drift apart. Quickly gaining his senses, he's able to reattach his body, most of it. The whole world is in pieces, like a puzzle. He notices a pair of legs on another section of the house and calls out. No answer. Upon entering the room, he notices a knife piercing the girl's chest and suddenly remembers her name, Kaido. In a flash, his name returns, Sakaido. He's the brilliant detective and he has a role to play. He must solve the mystery of her death. It turns out that he's in something called an idwell. They're using him to explore the manifestation of a serial killer's intent to kill, with the hopes of gaining leads in their investigation. Sakaido begins piecing the house together. All the books are real titles. The calendar dates are correct for the month of March 2019. Everything is important, but not everything will play a big role in the case, since it's all from the subconscious mind of the killer. Two investigators, Koharu and Matsuoka, watch the team work, waiting for their cue to head into the field. When they get an address, they head out. What happens is, they've got some tech that registers cognition particles at a crime scene, with which they construct the idwell environment. In the idwell, Sakaido enters a room full of people. The tech team searches databases and gets a hit for each. They're all victims, and 2 are reported missing. There's another, a reflection, one John Walker. Nobody in the room knows who Kaido is. She's not part of their family. So Sakaido takes things into his own hands and starts piecing together the jigsaw world. He uncovers the name of a restaurant in the negative space. In the field, Koharu notices the letters are angled and surmises where the killer would be standing to match that tilt. She gets a fresh reading of traces of a will to kill. Matsuoka decides to go in strapped. Regulations be damned. The perpetrator thereafter is called the perforator. He kills by drilling a hole in the victim's head. Matsuoka hears yelling, but only finds a victim, though still alive. Sakaido finds it odd that everything is fragmented and incomplete except for Kaido, and then realizes that it's the killer himself that's filling in her gaps. Suddenly, Koharu shows up behind him in the well. They quickly radio the field team, but she doesn't answer. She had picked up more cognition particles and went to check them out. Matsuoka sees who he believes to be the serial killer, but he had pulled a switcheroo and posed as a victim. He has a hole in his head just like all the victims, and when no one was looking, he captured Koharu and fled to the sewers. In the idwell, Sakaido tries to chase the killer, but is outmaneuvered. John Walker suddenly appears and jumps towards the brilliant detective. He raises his cane. Sakaido hits him, and he falls to the floor motionless. Koharu comes to tied to a table. The perforator asks her about the device she uses and how it works. He tells her it's best to answer before he drills a hole in her head, since not many can answer afterwards. They don't all die immediately. Some might last as long as himself. In the well, Sakaido realizes that since it's the killer's world, it seems perfectly normal to him, which is why he can move through it so easily. Koharu says if he wants to know how it works, she'll show him, and she forces her own head into the spinning drill bit. If she's gonna have a hole drilled in her head, she'll do it on her terms. A new well opens up, so they extract Sakaido and drop him into the new one. He blank slates again, sees Kaido, and realizes he's the brilliant detective. He finds a note. This was a suicide. Suddenly, a giant drill bit crushes the detective. The analysts get a location though. From a reflection on the giant drill bit, they're able to see details of the room she's being held in. Sprinkle in some fancy deduction, and they know where the room is. The perforator talks to Koharu, reflecting that maybe people have to drill their own holes. He insists she visit him when she recovers, as he's taken into custody. Momoki goes to visit Akihito. That's Sakaido, but in the real world. He's impressed by the rookie's idwell tactic. The two men talk about the nature of the job for a bit, and Akihito is taken back to his holding cell. Togo goes to speak with the director about the issue of John Walker showing up in a total of 5 serial killers' idwells. She thinks he can influence a person's will to kill, perhaps even making them serial killers. Back in his cell, Akihito thinks about Kaido's death in the rookie's idwell. Akihito dreams of his daughter. She was killed by the Challenger, a serial killer who beats his victims to death. Matsuoka visits Koharu. She asks about what her own idwell was like, and even expresses a desire to dive into it herself. Matsuoka has a long-winded explanation of why that's a terrible idea. Worst case, there's a theoretical possibility that the person's consciousness would become irretrievably lost, a phenomenon they call falling into dogma. Apparently, Koharu's limbic system is intact. She's just got some minor damage to the frontal lobe. She can still feel things like pleasure and anger, though. Sort of like Akihito, who once said something similar about himself. He and Matsuoka used to be partners. She asks if that means that she could become a brilliant detective, but Matsuoka tries to discourage her from doing anything as dangerous as becoming a pilot. He notices that she's been looking into the pyrotechnician, a new killer who's been bombing skyscrapers lately. There is some good news. They found the pyrotechnician's cognition particles at the last scene and are about to create an idwell. Akihito is summoned, but before he leaves the cell block, Fukuda, the perforator, tries to talk to him and asks where he's going. Upon entering the well, he finds himself on a turret, like at a castle, among a crowd of people. A sniper hiding behind a circular waterfall that surrounds the turret begins picking people off one by one. He notices Kaido and remembers that he's the brilliant detective. The others on the turret call out to him to take cover. He didn't come here to die, but surviving isn't the goal. Solving the mystery is. The techs can't get any matches on anyone in the crowd. They aren't real people, but random combinations of features that create these extras, which makes some sense since this guy's a bomber and doesn't get up close and personal with his victims. The waterfall also obscures the sniper's fire, making it difficult to place him. Sakaido takes a bullet to the back of the head and immediately dives back in. This continues. He considers the possibility of there being more than one sniper. One of the victims jumps from the turret, preferring that end over being shot. Sakaido refocuses. There's something about Kaido's body. He sees a woman about to jump and catches her by the hand before she falls to her death. He then exclaims that the case is solved. The guy from earlier, who jumped from the other side, is now somehow right below him. The tower is moving. The sniper is firing from a static location. Kaido noticed the position when she was gunned down, but it wasn't consistent with the trajectory of the bullet. It makes sense now. Suddenly, a man crawls by, acting like he's having a bit too much fun. The sniper is just his marionette. Back at HQ, they finally get hits on the victims by mixing and matching all the features of those on the turret. They were soldiers, a group who were caught in a bombing in the Middle East 4 years prior. The man Sakaido found, the perp, has a different face. Turns out he's had 7 procedures. He was always there at the scene posing as a photographer. Oddly though, the photos he took weren't of his work, but of the crowds of onlookers themselves taking pictures with their cell phones. Akihito talks with the pyrotechnician from the cell across from him. He calls him out on his twisted hellscape fetish for death and destruction at scale, and on the inconsistencies of his weakly cobbled personal philosophy. That night, the pyrotechnician chooses to check out, now that he'll never be able to recreate the hell that he's so enamored with again. After the incident, Akihito was sent to solitary confinement. Fukuda figures out that something's up, so they try him out as a brilliant detective. But he's 0 for 7, dying 10 times in each well. Not the best suited for the job, it seems. There's a live feed of a girl inside what looks like a coffin with a handful of glow sticks and air canisters. She accepts the fact that she must have been captured by the Gravedigger, but refuses to die if she can help it. This is his 7th victim, and the feed is routed through too many IPs to track down. They gleaned some cognition particles from the scene where the girl was taken, so it's time for Sakaido. He enters the well and finds a burned Kaido inside an apartment. When he opens the curtains, he sees rows upon rows of growing, burning apartment buildings. An explosion goes off near him. He sees a girl in a window across the way. Another sudden explosion then kills him, and he's dropped right back in. He's almost taken out by the same explosion, but catches himself this time. The girl is the victim in the feed, but younger here. The team theorizes that the flames could be symbolic. Another explosion, another attempt. He survives longer on the next attempt and even makes it to the other side, despite not remembering his previous experience inside the well. The team wonders why they even found particles this time, and they're surprised at how weak his will is. This time was different somehow, and they don't know why. Another death. The director tells them that maybe Akihito's will to save has diminished now that he's a serial killer and not a cop. The next dive lights a fire under him. He's done it. He's made it to the girl. He finds it odd that she's the only one who hasn't burned. And Kaido is another anomaly. She must have been transported post-mortem. They're using another fire to cover up and shift the blame? Perhaps a copycat. The girl then says Mr. Ono's house is really on fire. They lived in the same neighborhood when she was 5. He burned down his own house with his family still in it. The field team makes it to his house and they discover a barrel. When they open it, they find the girl's dead and has been for a while. The video was a recording. In the well, the girl thanks Sakaido for saving her. Momoki relays the information and then asks if Akihito wants to kill the perp. Is that an offer? He's caused 5 suicides while locked up just by talking to the killers. Not out of malice, but an overwhelming urge. Momoki asks one more question. Does he still consider him a friend? He answers that he's the only tether he has left. At the scene, Koharu recognizes someone and follows him. It's the missing person from the perforator case. He shows her the hole in his head and then kisses her. He realizes what he's doing and books it. They ask Fukuda about it, but he just tells them to ask if the wind blowing through his hole is cold. If not, then it might be bad. Koharu starts to theorize that he, Kazuta, might be the Gravedigger scoping out the copycat. She goes on to think that maybe the hole crossed some wires, and his will to kill is swapped with affection. They head to the scene of the kiss and get a hit. Sakaido falls into the idwell, landing on a small floating island with a single stylish house that takes up most of it. Upon entering the house, he sees Kaido and instantly thinks he's got it. He makes a series of deductions that lead him to look under the floaty corpse and blood. They confirm that Kazuta is the Gravedigger when Sakaido finds what looks like a little girl, but is an amalgamation of the Gravedigger's victims hiding below Kaido. They say there's a super scary monster, and the person who killed Kaido must be out there fighting it. He finds a photo from Kazuta's school days, the same found by investigators who searched his place back when he was considered a victim of the perforator. Koharu and Matsuoka head to the scene. There's a soy sauce facility close by, so the victims may have been sealed in barrels instead of coffins. Sakaido heads outside and finds John Walker slicing Kazuta up, so he throws the only weapon he has, a vase. The man doesn't react and just flies away. When the field team gets to the facility, they see wires coming from some of the barrels. They cut the power cables, which somehow triggers a barrel to break open. Only it's not soy sauce, it's gasoline. The whole place goes up in flames. Meanwhile, Koharu and Matsuoka head to see one of the people from the photo. She asks about any love interests Kazuta might have had. Her head hole starts to bleed. Inami doesn't even flinch and helps wipe up the blood. Koharu presses her, and she admits to having some romantic feelings towards Kazuta. She continues to question Inami. She had a boyfriend that she didn't really love, so she accuses her of having feelings for Kazuta again. Koharu then hits her with "you love violence and watching people die," and then drops the fact that she's kissed Kazuta, and Inami never has. Koharu whips out a gun and begins to place her under arrest. Matsuoka notices the knife block is empty and quickly pushes Koharu out of the way, taking a knife in the back of his shoulder. They call it in and prepare to deal with the perp. Sakaido talks with the girl in the idwell, and then what remains of Kazuta asks to speak with him. Koharu decides to shoot Inami to lure Kazuta out. She just shoots the wall, and Kazuta jumps over the banister and lunges at her with a knife. She grabs the knife he threw moments before and plunges it into his chest. Inami can only watch as he kisses her for the second time. In total, John Walker has shown up in 6 serial killers' idwells. The team theorizes that they must have seen him in person somehow, and that he only appears to those he targets. What if he has his own machine that can dive into an unconscious mind? Perhaps the original model of their own tech. And apparently, the creator of their tech has gone missing. They check Fukuda's stomping grounds and find cameras that were keeping tabs on him, most likely John Walker. Matsuoka proposes that he may have a new brilliant detective candidate, seeing as the primary requirement is having killed someone. Sakaido dives into Inami's idwell and discovers the victims of the Gravedigger. He continues through the train cars and happens upon Inami and Kazuta. Elsewhere, the field team finds a barrel with a victim inside. At this point, Inami has no reason to withhold information. She then asks to meet Koharu and wants to ask her about the hole in her head. The director approves Koharu as a brilliant detective. Sakaido sits with Kaido a little longer and breaks down. Matsuoka refuses Koharu's thanks. He didn't want it to end up like this. More than just having to have killed someone, you have to have a thirst for killing, and it's become clear that she's got at least a taste for it. He tells her that he just got her transferred to protect himself and his colleagues. The surveillance equipment found at Fukuda's place is similar to evidence gathered on the Challenger, the man who killed Akihito's daughter. They enter and find cognition particles left by Akihito at a surprising level. They head down to the Challenger's arena that he kept in the basement and find particles from the Challenger. They decide to try out Koharu's brilliant detective abilities in Akihito's idwell. When she gets there, it's a giant numbered board being struck by lightning. She finds she's handcuffed to Kaido and remembers that she's a brilliant detective named Mio Hisharito. Inami confronts Fukuda in the holding cell. She tells him she's actually met 2 others with holes in their heads. Akihito realizes they're diving into his well and becomes concerned that they might find John Walker. Hisharito realizes that a third party must have put the cuffs on them, or she'd have been struck by lightning too. It was Akihito, dead on the square next to them. She begins to count between the lightning strikes and discovers there's a 9-second interval. In addition to the cuff keys, she finds a gun on Akihito's corpse and fires it into the air. She tells the others to find a spot that's already been hit. It won't strike there again. She starts counting, making sure she makes it to another square that's already been hit within 9 seconds. She makes it out of the grid and discovers a cockpit used when diving into an idwell. Inception, a well within a well. She ends up getting in and suddenly men burst through the door and accuse Momiki of being John Walker. They found the bones of their fancy tech's creator buried in his yard. Togo is immediately appointed the new director, but they still can't extract Koharu. Togo goes to fill Akihito in. They didn't find John Walker in his well, which is a relief. But Momiki wouldn't send someone in his place, and Akihito demands to know what happened, and she tells him what just went down. It turns out that the lightning strikes were counting down digits of pi on the numbered tiles every 9.03 seconds, starting from the day Akihito's daughter was murdered. The name they found on the cockpit in Akihito's well was the victim rescued after he killed the Challenger. She disappeared from a hospital one night when a group of 13 nurses all went unconscious simultaneously. They decide to send Fukuda into Akihito's well, but he just sees everything as random and decides there's no point in trying to ascertain where and when the lightning will strike. Well, he's been struck 20 times so far, so maybe he should put some thought into it. They pull him out of there and drop him into Momoki's well, and they send Akihito in also, just in case there's another cockpit in there. Anaido, that's Fukuda's avatar, wakes up, and then Sakaido. Neither of them have any clue of who they are, and they're in a vast, unending desert. They find Kaido and remember they're both brilliant detectives. Her death seems pretty straightforward, exposure, but there are bands of pale skin on each of their wrists and footprints going away from the scene. That must be the mystery. Sakaido tells Anaido to piss on his coat and wrap it around his head to prevent water loss. Anaido clearly isn't that brilliant. Sakaido decides to stay and examine the body, while Anaido decides to follow the footprints. Sakaido finishes and catches up. The sun isn't moving, so it seems the desert really is endless. The sand gives way, and Sakaido falls down a dune right into a patch of quicksand. Luckily, Anaido does have some knowledge after all. Momiki finds out that they're in his well and freaks out, telling them to pull out now. The detectives find a corpse in another patch of quicksand and a half-buried cockpit, still running. The name, Kiki Asukai, the very same that was on the cockpit in Akihito's well. Sakaido tells Anaido to wait 10 minutes and then pull him out. Momiki is adamant that it's all a trap. Akihito wakes up in his home with his wife and daughter still living. He still remembers everything and even how he got there. He realizes that he doesn't have much time and embraces them. And if this is the past, then he has the advantage. He heads to work to see Momiki and brings him to the Challenger's house, which shocks him, to say the least. Akihito walks up to the front door and challenges the Challenger to a real fight this time. Well, the Challenger breaks his arm, and that's when Akihito decides to take advantage of the fact that he's got a firearm, just one to each leg for now. He gets on top of the cop and starts bashing his head in, so Akihito fires a few more rounds and takes the lead. As expected, the guy with the gun wins, but it's an important emotional victory for Akihito. Momiki rushes into the scene and gets directed towards the underground ring. He finds a girl there, badly beaten. It's Kiki Asukai. Akihito visits her in the hospital. It's Kairu. Asking her about the Challenger causes her to remember him, and she somehow projects her memories, and Akihito experiences them. Suddenly, the facelifter waltzes in, ready to kill Kiki. Akihito recognizes him and bashes him with a pole until he disappears. Confused, he asks what's going on. The girl simply replies that he's in her dream. He wakes up, in his hospital bed, to his family standing over him. Momiki walks in and wants to talk about what just happened back at the Challenger's place. Akihito goes to check on Kiki, who is in fact in the hospital. It was all real. He was actually in her dream, in an idwell within her dream. Apparently, serial killers enter her dreams every night to kill her. It all started with John Walker, and then he started letting others in. Akihito promises he'll find some way to end it. He goes to visit the facelifter to interrogate him about John Walker. We don't get to see exactly what goes down between them, but the next time he sees Kiki, he tells her that she'll never have to worry about the facelifter again. She reveals that sometimes the killer's thoughts can manifest in her subconscious. Akihito wonders if everything has just been a dream. He makes it his mission to catch all the killers he's already caught in the real world, though he's becoming less and less sure about which is the real world. Momiki questions his behavior as of late. They both visit Kiki and find the creator of the cockpits doing tests on her. Akihito has already taken care of 3 killers. She didn't believe John Walker was real before, and he's the last one left. She reveals that she's going to disperse into the universe and somehow fracture it in the process, and asks him to end her life to prevent that from ever happening. Kiki goes missing from the hospital. The 13 nurses went unconscious like before, all claiming to have had the same dream. Momiki fills Akihito in and leaves room for him to chime in with anything he might have to add. But Akihito keeps his insights to himself. He had forgotten about the perforator until he sees one of his victims on the street, then goes to take care of him as well. On his way, though, he's stopped by Koharu. She claims that he must be in a well within a well too, since she is. But he denies this at first, still trying to cling to the hope that this is his new reality. Apparently, it's only been 20 minutes for her, but for him, it's been 2 years. The world suddenly starts to break down, most likely from their meeting. He frantically calls his family, accepts what his reality actually is, mourns them all over again, and says goodbye for the last time. They both wonder what will happen when the world falls apart. He remembers that he should debrief her on all that he's learned while he was here, But just then, Fukuda finally counts 10 minutes and extracts him. It turns out that Fukuda's hole is good for something. He remembers everything from the real world. He found a picture of Akihito in the well and knew they were supposed to stay with Kaido. He reminds Akihito of who he really is, which creates a dogma, a well storm. Akihito was tricked into entering his own id well. It looks like they were bamboozled, and someone switched the cognition particles at the scene. Akihito berates Fukuda, but refuses to kill him like he wants. He figures out that Fukuda has arithmomania, which is why he drilled a hole in his head. But John Walker wants him dead, so there must be something he can do. Since he has a map of the entire well in his head, he can navigate it. The cockpits disappeared from both wells as soon as the storm started. Koharu is still in the well within the well and uses Akihito's notes and secret hideout. She finds that the maximum number of victims is 7, and some of them survive. He always gets Akihito to kill the killers before they can claim an 8th victim. 1 killer for each day of the week, and all their victims die on different days. Fukuda finds the cockpit that Koharu is in inside this well. Meanwhile, she goes to meet with Fukuda. He's intrigued by her and is oddly cooperative. He uses his proficiency with numbers to recall the exact dates and times that correspond to his meetings with John Walker. Working the assumption that it's someone who works on the project, she cross-references employee work schedules and discovers some overseas business trips that line up. In the real world, Matsuoka goes to Momoki's place and confirms that he was framed. Before they wake Koharu up, she dials the chief and calls him out for being John Walker. They wake her and remind her of who she is so she can get her memory back. They head to Kaido in the well so they can be extracted. Koharu notifies the team of John Walker's identity when suddenly the lights go out. Elsewhere, the chief reveals that Kaido, Kiki, has been in the building the whole time. Kiki is set loose and starts melting the realities of everyone she passes, knocking them out. The chief walks through the door and shoots Akihito, and then shoots himself in the gut, climbs into a cockpit, and ends it for good. All 3 decide to dive in after him, but Fukuda passes out before he can move the chief's corpse and get into the cockpit. The chief wakes up in his own well, which is covered in masks. Having created so many wells and experimented on Kiki for so long, their consciousnesses have somehow melded. The chief enters another well by putting on a mask, and the brilliant detectives chase after him. Elsewhere, the team shares the same dream in a strange world being chased by giant boulders. They're concerned about whether if they die in the dream, they'll die in real life. Momoki and Matsuoka race back to HQ to find the whole building has become some sort of oversized variation of their fancy tech. Momoki postulates that the only way to stop it is to put Kiki back into the machine. The detectives enter Koharu's well, and the chief tells her who she is, creating a well storm. Fukuda somehow finally catches up. Akihito makes it to his own well and remembers who he is, so now they're all on the same playing field. Momoki and Matsuoka find the helmet that they used to protect Kiki when she was in the hospital, so they can enter the building without being sucked into a dream. Inami somehow appears in the chief's id well and fires a gun at Koharu, but Fukuda jumps in front of the bullet to save her. Inami then puts on Kazuta's mask, only to be immediately killed by the scary monster. Akihito finds Koharu and they set off to find John Walker. Momoki puts on a bomb suit kitted out with all kinds of life support tech, including the helmet, and enters the building, putting Matsuoka in charge from outside. Akihito finds John Walker and distracts him long enough for Koharu to launch a surprise attack. They steal his hat and attempt to get him to chase them. They lead him to Fukuda's well, the jigsaw world, and he sits down in a chair and laughs to himself, thinking he's won. Koharu points out that since he created Akihito, the cornerer, he's really created 8 serial killers, which goes against his whole god-complex obsession with 7s. They distract him long enough to activate their trap. That seat he's in? Oh, that's a cockpit. Checkmate. Koharu destroys the controls so he can never be extracted. Akihito then says their only way out is hope. They have to put their trust in those on the outside. Meanwhile, Momiki makes his way through the building. They keep him hopped up on adrenaline to keep him awake, and even have to restart his heart once. He stumbles towards Kiki, who recognizes him. At first, she thinks he's there to save her, but then he points a gun at her, just to throw it away like a badass. He cuts off the transmission to Matsuoka and tries to convince her to run away, far away, but she knows it would never work. She picks up the gun, but it only clicks, not loaded. He can't kill her, but the only solutions are death or the machine. At least in the machine, she can indirectly help others. Momiki promises that he will never give up on trying to save her. As soon as she goes back in, most everyone wakes up, and they extract the detectives. Fukuda didn't make it. The curtain closes on the John Walker case, and everything else is swept under the rug. The program continues like nothing's changed. Well, maybe like just a little has. Thank you for sticking until the end. Subscribe for more videos like this.